Hello, everybody. Welcome to another review. Today we're looking at the second episode of the Disney Plus series Loki, the variant. Last week we tried something a little different. Previously, when I've done these R-rated reviews, I've kind of walked the episode bit by bit. And instead, I'm trying to kind of compartmentalize my thoughts a little bit, get them into like clusters and sort of figure out what I want to say as a complete thought before just kind of streamline walking through everything that happens. And we're going to see how that continues through here. Seemed like people generally liked it last time, so I'm going to stick with it. I again have a couple sort of rough categories of things to talk about. It's interesting. Most of the things that I have to talk about actually do kind of fall into the main plot. I don't have like a huge amount of like individual sections. I guess there's like some subdivision-y things in there, but there are some rather big spoilers that'll be coming later in here. I'll make sure to warn people before it happens, and then we'll wrap things up with some conclusions and things. This episode does a bit more exposition in the same way kind of that the first episode did. We get a glimpse actually of Loki working in the TVA. It's unclear exactly what his specific sort of role is there, but he works he's essentially he's under the supervision of Agent Mobius, and we get kind of this is the episode where we get kind of a bit more of like the buddy cop movie sort of feel, though it's definitely a different dynamic than I think we're used to. Like most of the time it'll be kind of like the straight man and the wild card or something like that, and we get that a little bit. Like Agent Mobius is definitely more of the straight man of the two, and Loki's a lot more mischievous, obviously, but there's an extra dynamic where Mobius is explicitly responsible for Loki. Like Loki is technically a criminal who is working with the cops. Like that's kind of the angle that they're going with for this, and it gets made explicitly clear in this episode as well that if Loki acts out of line too much or winds up being more of a liability than a help, that Mobius is just going to kill him. So there's like a lot more depth between the two of them than you might get in just kind of a standard, buddy cop kind of trope. Like we didn't have that kind of dynamic in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, for example, where neither of them were going to kill each other. They're just not as sure that they want to be dealing with each other in general. So Loki is, like I said, working within the TVA. He gets this jacket. I thought so in the marketing material for the show, it looked like he was wearing kind of a like a duster or something, but it's actually a bit more of like a workman's jacket. Like honestly, if you think of the like brown jackets that a lot of like sheriff's departments and like state cops, like highway cops and the ones who will work in like federal reserves or parks or things like that, less beat cop, where those are more like shirts and occasionally like jackety style material. This is more like a brown, it looked like more one of those like brown jacket kind of materials, and it's got variant in huge letters across the back in orange, which both A, gives us a little silly kind of moment, but also B, it does kind of, it's weird, right? Like it's a combination of like, it feels like a metaphorical kick me sign just in general, but also it just kind of paints a huge target on his back. Like I wouldn't be surprised if this comes back in future episodes where someone will kind of look at it and go like, this is what they think of you. Like they don't trust you at all. Whether that shouldn't be anything other than obvious anyway, but it does kind of carry a bit of a almost like discriminatory kind of vibe. Like he's got that, like, we don't know if anybody else who works at the TVA are variant. It seems like generally speaking, people who are brought in are usually just reset, but we don't know for sure. There might be other variants who are actually working within the TVA, and we don't really know. We know Loki is, obviously, but we don't really know what the rest of the dynamic going on there is. We actually get to see a glimpse of other Loki variants. Apparently, Loki is one of the most frequent encounters of the TVA. There are all kinds of variants of Loki running around all the time, which isn't all that surprising, but also, so this is one of those things where, like, I'm very used to time travel stories and, like, time paradox stories and things like that, but it gets really hard for me to wrap my brain around like timeline correction, I guess, story. So the idea is we've got the sacred timeline, which is essentially the main MCU timeline. Like that's what that is. We get some clarification near the top of this episode how reset charges work. So the idea is not so much, hey, so in the first episode, it made it seem like the entire timeline was being erased. Like the entirety of existence was being wiped away and it pruned to the branch. The term they use is prune as a nice like companion for branches in the timeline. But they made it seem in the first episode, because Loki looks back kind of horrified, and it almost makes it seem like they just are casually destroying a timeline entirely. But instead what's happening, and we get this visually, is basically anything that is different from what's supposed to be happening there gets erased. It gets, it turns, I don't know how to describe the look of it. It's almost like, the very edges of a campfire coal or something. It's got this kind of like burning sort of look to it. It's got this sparking, burning sort of thing, and then it just kind of disappears. It essentially looks like the material of its existence, kind of burns away, like embers, I guess. But so what's interesting is this means that, and the idea is that when these things are burned away, because those are the variances in the timeline reconverges and it goes back to normal, which means, weirdly enough, that the alternate timeline that Loki comes from has been corrected. It does not exist anymore. He literally doesn't even have a timeline to go back to at this point, which makes me wonder how this went down. And I talked with Sarah about it, because now we have to like walk through a couple different versions. Normal 2012, New York City. The Avengers get the Tesseract. They encounter Alexander Pierce in the at the ground floor, the lobby of Stark Tower, and it's kind of unclear who walks away with the Tesseract. I guess it's probably who does walk away with it. We know that Hydra winds up with the scepter because Alexander Pierce is with Hydra. I think he's actually the director of Hydra at that point. Maybe not yet. But the scepter winds up with Dr. List at Baron von Strucker's with Hydra. The Tesseract, though, I think goes back with Thor. So the Avengers lose the scepter but keep the Tesseract. So that's what normally happens. They have a little scuffle. The scepter goes back with Hydra. Tesseract goes with the Avengers, or goes to the Avengers, and then Thor takes it back to Asgard with Loki. Then we had the alternate version from Avengers Endgame, where Future, Tony, and Scott involve themselves. They cause a disruption that means that the Avengers lose the Tesseract, and then right as Tony's about to walk away with it, the Hulk bursts through the stairwell, knocks the Tesseract back to Loki, and he escapes. So in that alternate 2012, and then Loki lands in Mongolia, gets captured by the TVA, and then that timeline gets pruned. But that's the thing, is that timeline was essentially setting up that now the Tesseract was just elsewhere with Loki. Both Loki and the Tesseract don't even exist in that timeline properly, so I'm not entirely sure how that works. I'm not positive if it puts another Loki back, puts another Tesseract back, or what, but we don't really know those exact mechanics. But regardless, that timeline has been corrected, and I'm wondering how they correct it. Like, there has to be a set of things that then happen in order to reconverge it, right? Like, it can't just be like, so it can't just be that Tony and Scott don't show up, and it can't just be like, Loki just doesn't see, like, Loki brings up in the first episode that the Avengers were the ones who messed with time, which is a fair statement. But then Judge Renslayer says that was supposed to happen, which is very confusing because it means the timekeepers are accounting for time travel and mistakes in time travel, and also Steve Rogers' weird field trip, his weird 80-year field trip back in time. All of that was apparently A-okay according to the timekeepers. So I have to imagine that this alternate 2012 is essentially Tony and Scott try to get the Tesseract. They get hit by the Hulk. Loki doesn't grab it, and the Avengers keep it, and Thor takes it to Asgard. And then Tony and Steve go back to 1970. Like, that's the only way that makes any real sense to me. Like, they just go, it's too dangerous to make a second attempt. We got to get out of here. It's just like a lot to kind of grapple with. But we get to see the reset charge. We get to see it in action. It just kind of like sparks out things that aren't supposed to be there and then returns things to their like agreed upon state, I guess. We do get to see different versions of Loki. Like I said, the reason I went off on that long tangent was because I'm curious how these other things went down. Like, we know how this Loki showed up because time travel happened and he managed to get away with a Tesseract. But there's apparently a version of Loki who I think is a cyclist. Like, he's a Tour de France cyclist and winner, I think, because he had the yellow thing going on. There's one of him that's like super buff. There's one of him that looks like he came out of Skyrim. There's a bunch of different types of Lokis, and it's not really clear how any of those happened. Also, the first one they show, if you look closely, he's got blue skin, so he's kind of fully Jotun frost giant Loki. Like, he just goes with it. So that's kind of interesting. Because Loki is kind of learning how the TVA works, we're still getting more exposition about the world through him. Even some, and the other shows had a bit of a problem with this too, even some exposition that felt a little overkill. Like, he's asked, there we go, outright what a red line event is, which I feel like we got a pretty good idea of what that was in the last episode, but he confirms that it's basically the point at which the TVA can no longer reset a Nexus event, which makes me wonder, so if they have a red line, right, and they know what a red line will do, does this imply that there are alternate timelines where the red line has occurred? And what does that mean? Do the timekeepers then have to personally intervene, or what? I'm sort of wondering if there's some insane time wizard at the end of this who is trying to manipulate time, and the timekeepers don't even exist at all. I'm just like trying to figure out like what could even happen there. There's also the question: how does all of this work in relation to the time stone? Because the time stone can reverse time, and in fact, the show even has a little Easter egg that very much points out that the time stone is something that they got their eyes on. So I think 5 of the 6 stones showed up in that drawer. I don't think the Mind Stone did, but all the other ones did, including some time stones, which was doubly interesting. A few other space stones, reality stones, all the other ones showed up. Which carries their own various implications. Some soul stones showed up, so I don't know how that happened, but there's a computer that Loki is doing like exercises on, and I wrote down the quote. He's doing what appears to be like a word problem, like a math problem kind of deal, like a quiz, and it says, Thanos has 2 apples. He eats both, but realizes he wants more. He goes back in time 20 minutes and eats the apples again. Does this mean the apples will not have existed in the timeline he left? And there's 3 answers, and they're essentially a joke about how confusing this stuff is to like make work functionally. But like, one of them says that he wouldn't be hungry in the timeline he left because the apples are now in him, and there's one that says, no, it's an alternate timeline, so they're separate now anyway. One that says Thanos isn't even there. Like, they all have different answers, and they all feel like various like justifications for how time travel works in the MCU, which I think is great. Also, man, the TVA truly does not give a fucking shit about Thanos. They really do not care about this guy at all, and it's kind of amazing. Between them being aware of the time travel plot to stop to revert Thanos' snap, the word problem using Thanos as like a punchline in there as well, all of these things, as well as like they take a trip ahead of 2023. They go to 2050 in this episode briefly, so like they're well aware that that's a thing. I wonder if the TVA suffered from the snap themselves, and I also wonder both where and when the TVA exists. It actually gets brought up briefly in the episode. They go somewhere. I won't get into that yet because that's actually a really great part of the episode that I want to talk about a little more. But they go to a point and they say, we're from the future. And then he turns to Mobius and he's like, we are from the future, right? Like the Time Variance Authority, it sounds future-y. It's from the future. And Mobius doesn't answer. And the way that this feels to me, again, I don't know as far as where, but as to when, I wonder if the idea is that the TVA exists at a space in time. I won't say a point, but it's like if you think of time as a line, right? We're moving forward at 1 second per second. We're moving forward that way, 1 second per second. So if you just say like, 3:05 p.m., you're not referring to like a moving thing. You're referring to a block of time, 60 seconds. I think that the TVA exists at the furthest end of that line, but it's not a point. It's moving forward. But the idea is the timekeepers are said to be actively, untangling the branches, I think they said, in order to continue time moving forward to figure out where it's all going to end. Which, for one, I think is a great metaphor for Kevin Feige and the various writers and showrunners and screenwriters for the MCU. It kind of feels like it's a reference to them being the ones to figure out from this vast array of options how things are going to move forward. But I think the idea is the TVA exists at the end of the timeline, or at the furthest point in the timeline, as the timekeepers are weaving through all the other things that continue from there, which would mean that it's not just the far future, but the end future. Like, there's nothing after this. Everything is accessible and before this. We at least are aware of, let's see, through events in the episode, we at least see that they have access to the year 2301. So it's at least the 24th century. Don't know any more than that. So, yeah. That was a really long thing. But I'm curious, though, if there are red line events that have happened, and if I know this is like a negative tangent back into other stuff. I have my like list that I'm kind of observing, but yeah. And we also get to hear verbally what a reset charge does. It disintegrates everything in vicinity to prune the affected radius of a timeline branch. We get to see a reset charge after the. So our Loki is a variant, but I feel like the Loki in Loki just needs to be Loki at this point, and the variant that is being hunted by the TVA just needs to be the variant for the sake of this to make any sense. The variant shows up in, I think, 1985, and there's a Ren Fair event and all of these things, and the TVA shows up because there's a Nexus event that's starting, and they go into like a tent, there's music playing, and then Loki kind of attacks them, or rather the variant attacks them, does a little whoop to one of the temples of one of the I think they're called Hunters. They've called them Minutemen and Hunters. Maybe they're different classifications, but I'll go with Minutemen. The Minuteman on the side there, it looks a lot like Wanda's like little mental trickery from Age of Ultron. But uses that to kind of take control of one of the Minutemen, and they fight, and it's set to Holding Out for a Hero, which is the third time in a week that I've heard it used in something, following the He-Man revival cartoon trailer, and also the Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy Square Enix game trailer, not gameplay trailer, I guess. So it does feel a little bit old at this point. Of the three of them, I'll rank them right now. He-Man did it the best. Loki did fine. And Guardians of the Galaxy felt the least structured around it. It felt like it was just kind of there for the sake of having something there. But yeah. So this all happens. The variant escapes with the Enchanted Minuteman. And Loki is kind of set on the task of figuring out exactly what's going on here. They show up at the tent. I know that I'm jumping into my beat by beat thing here, but I'm just kind of skipping through the episode real quick to get to the part that I want to talk about. They go there. He tries to play a trick to... I don't entirely know what his plan was, honestly. He tries to buy some time. I think he was trying to get a red line event to happen so that the Minutemen couldn't prune it so he could escape or something. Unclear exactly. But as sort of punishment, he's tasked with essentially just like, now it's paperwork time. You're going to figure out what's going on here, and you're not going to go on any more assignments, basically. And he starts looking around, and he gets into the paperwork for Asgard. He looks at the events of Thor Ragnarok, essentially, and he realizes through all of this that the variant is hiding inside of apocalypses, which is such a fucking cool idea. And has this ever been done before for a time travel plot of hiding inside of an apocalypse so that no one notices you're there? So the idea is that the variant can go to the moment before an apocalypse, can do whatever they want so long as they're in the affected radius of the event itself, and then leave because no one will ever notice that they were there. So the example being, if you went, so for example, if he went to Asgard, did a bunch of stuff on Asgard right before Ragnarok, and then Surtur destroys Asgard. It's literally a completely obliterated planet. Nobody's going to go looking through there, and therefore any differences would never be noticed, and any changes would probably be destroyed anyway. The metaphor that he uses for this is amazing. He takes Mobius's salad, and he starts shaking salt into it. And he says, this is me going back in time and throwing Hulk off the Rainbow Bridge, and this is me setting fire to the palace. And Mobius is just like, oh, don't set fire to the palace. Don't set. And I was like, I love this. And then he takes, Chase shows up again. Was it Chase? I think it was Chase. Oh no, I forgot his name. Started with a C. The clerk takes his coconut water. It's kind of what it looked like. And just kind of squeezes it right in there. Here's the apocalypse. Like, that's the end of the world. That's the end of the world right there. And then he goes back and he's like, so it doesn't matter what I do to this because the apocalypse happens. And he's just shaking the salt and pepper. And he says that it's a clumsy metaphor. And I'm like, no, that's a great metaphor because who gives a shit about this anymore? The salad is ruined. The apocalypse has happened. No one's going to go through this salad and go, hey, why is there salt and pepper in it? Like, who cares at this point? Such a great idea. Such a great concept. And I need to know if this has ever been done in time travel stuff before. I guess Doctor Who at least a little bit played with this. I don't know if the 12th Doctor bit with me, the character me, qualifies, but I do feel like the 10th Doctor story at the end of the world with the Master at the end of the third season. I used to know the names of these. I used to know the names of these episodes really well. Is it The Sound of Drums? No, The Sound of Drums, I think, is the second episode. It's a 3-part finale. The first part, whatever it was. It's when it's with Professor Yana and all that stuff. But regardless, that's at the end of time on purpose that he could, get to the end and then, yeah. Although I think the idea is he was hiding at the end of time to avoid the Time Lords. But regardless, it's so cool. It's so goddamn cool. I love it. I had a thought that, like, oh, could you use the reset charges as murder weapons? Like, if someone chases you through time, could you then take one? Because they look like they kind of embed into the ground normally. Could you take one and just stab someone with it and set it off and have it just explode them or disintegrate them or whatever? Like, they don't wind up using that. Loki has been stealing all these charges, and then little time doors open, and it's like, oh my god, they're just going to obliterate so much shit. And it's interesting because I would think that the reset charges were designed to get rid of changes to time, but instead we see that it could also just alter time in general. Because the quote we get is, somebody just bombed the sacred timeline. You see a shot with the TVA and some engineers observing the timeline, just watching 1,000 branches coming out of this thing. And essentially the idea is that these time doors are being opened all across time. And Loki, or the variant, is essentially trying to destroy the sacred timeline. There's a big list of affected areas, and I think there's some interesting ones in there. The first one that gets listed is Portugal, 1492, which makes me wonder if like if the very first thing that the variant is doing is fucking with the Columbus voyages to America, basically. I don't know the exact dates of those embarkations, but I just thought that was interesting. There's also a number of really interesting locations that are dropped in there. They also hit Vormir, where the Soul Stone lives. It hits Asgard as well. It hits Sakaar. It hits Xandar. It also hits Titan, as well as Ego. Like, literally just Ego itself, himself, is hit with one of these things. And I'm trying to figure out, like, is the variant trying to kill Thanos? Is the variant trying to kill anything more powerful, perhaps, than Loki? Because if it's like, all right, I'll kill Thanos, I'll kill Ego, I'll kill the Nova Corps, I'll kill the Grandmaster, I'll kill Odin and Thor and Frigga, I'll destroy the Soul Stone. There's just a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And near the oh boy, I totally forgot to warn people with spoilers. Oh dear. Well, we're already in it at this point, so sorry. As we get to the end, Loki has this awesome thing where he gets, so him and Mobius are split onto two different teams as they investigate a Roxcart shopping center. Essentially, it looks like a giant Costco in 2050, where a huge hurricane is going to completely destroy the entire town and everyone in it is killed. That's the apocalypse that they track the variant to, because that's the time period that the kablooey gum from the previous episode comes from. They get split into two different teams. Loki and the Minuteman that beat him up in the first episode go and find this guy who then turns out to actually have been an enchanted person by the variant, who then enchants the Minuteman, who they start talking, and Loki tries kind of bargaining and all of this stuff, and it's interesting, but it's kind of the chess game thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, well, I don't want that. I'm going to do this instead. Oh, well, I kind of want this thing. And, like, that's not the particularly interesting part, but the Loki suggests essentially that he's going to betray the TVA and take and usurp the timekeepers, and he needs a powerful lieutenant, and offers it to the variant. The variant's like, nah, don't care. And he gets into a physical fight at one point. He's not using as much magic as I think he probably could have gotten away with, but he's finally approached by the variant in like a cloak and hood, and they pull back the hood and reveal a blonde woman with the little horn helmet thing. And I have to assume, based on everything, based on the way that the variant has been referred to by the TVA, who would certainly know for sure who they're looking at, that this is Loki, that this is a female Loki, and which makes the whole, I think I mentioned in the last review, there was the whole sex fluid was listed on his on Loki's little bio sheet. So it was not just like an interesting little thing. It was also, I guess, a little bit of a like foreshadowing or spoiler maybe even. So we have the variant who then gets out of there, has a scene that looks kind of like this. Everything is very deep orangey kind of thing. I'm lightening up a little bit because otherwise it'll be impossible to see the video. But it's very interesting. I'm curious what's going to happen, because like overall for this season, because originally I was like, oh, our variant Loki is going to end the season living outside of time and doing stuff with the TVA, and that's just going to be kind of his thing. And like maybe he'll get to go back to his alternate time. It's like, okay, the alternate timeline is gone. I feel like this season would most likely end with the variant getting killed, but now I don't even know. Now I don't know what's going on. This could be a thing where the variant winds up replacing Loki in time, I guess. I don't know, but it's very interesting so far. But there's also a second season of the show, so who even knows? That's coming. It's not out yet, obviously. It's another year or two away. But so a couple other like random thoughts and details. Before they go to the superstore, Mobius gives Loki his daggers and he's like, just in case. And the Minuteman walks right by. He's like, I don't think so. Nope. And takes them immediately and puts them away. I thought that was fun. The introduction to Haven Hills, Alabama was a really good shot. You get this cool futuristic electric billboard situation, and it gets fucking nailed by what I think like a radio tower or something, and gets blown away to reveal the Roxcart superstore. And it's such a good... It's one of the best transitions and one of the best like exposition shots that the whole of the MCU has done. Maybe not in terms of beauty or anything, but like in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, getting the job done, doing what we needed to do. It was bang on. Loved it. That was honestly one of my favorite things of the episode. Weirdly enough, just real good filmmaking. Let's see. When they're at the Ren Fair, when the TVA first shows up, this is more kind of random stuff that I liked from the episode. The Ren Fair, there's a woman at the Ren Fair who immediately calls them out for wearing all these futuristic cop outfits, and is like, hey, you're not really in costume. And then they go march off. She's like, some of us need this, Cool. Like, it's just like a cute kind of real moment of like, yeah, if these dudes showed up to a Ren Fair like that, I think at least somebody would be like, yo, kind of ruining the vibe of this place. Can you maybe not wear that? I already mentioned the holding out for a hero bit. There's a beautiful shot right before Loki gets delivered to his paperwork where Loki and Mobius ride an elevator, and it looks like this impossibly huge elevator going down this immense office building thing. And I thought to myself, that reminds me of the Atlanta Marriott. And the only reason I know that is because back in high school, I forget what year specifically, but I was on the first robotics team in my high school, and one year the championships. Actually, I think it stayed in Atlanta, so it must have been my senior year. So it's probably 2005. The regional championships or whatever. Or maybe it was national championships, must have been national championships, were in Atlanta, Georgia, and we stayed at the Atlanta Marriott, which is a gorgeous hotel, very, very recognizable. Just if you stand in the lobby and look up, it's wild. It's this solid lobby, goes all the way up, and it was the tallest lobby. It was the tallest lobby in the world for about 14 years. And it is huge and really lovely looking. Normally looks a lot more orangey. But I was like, wow, that reminds me of the Atlanta Marriott. And then I went and looked up a picture and was like, nope, yep, that is the Atlanta Marriott. Okay, cool, got it. And they kind of grayscaled it a little bit. It looked more cementy, basically, in terms of color tone. Normally it's a bit more warm and amber kind of colored. But I thought that was amazing as like cool little thing to notice. The Atlanta Marriott has shown up in a handful of TV shows and movies. The other one that I had seen that I had recognized it from was The Hunger Games: Catching Fire. The second one of those has the lobby to the Marriott as well. It's just a really good location for that. I'll have to find a picture and load it in here. One of the very first pictures I ever put online was to my Facebook, where I posted a picture I took in the elevator so I want to say, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's the 10th or the 17th. I think it's the 17th floor the picture will show, but I think that it's like, so there's the lobby, and then there's two different sets of elevators. Ones that go to the first half of the floors, and ones that go to the second half of the floors. They just kind of go express up to the second half, and then they do all the ones that are on the top. Except for one floor that all the elevators go to roughly near the middle. It's not at the middle, but it's near the middle. It might be the 10th floor, now I'm thinking about it. But it was, and you step into the elevator, and on one of them, it would tell you, like, up, and there it says, like, 17 or 24 to 35, which makes sense. And then the other one says 1 to 23 or 17, which was a very confusing thing to see. I feel like that's one where it's like, all right, I guess you're calling out the floor that you can switch on, but you don't really verbalize that very well. But yeah, long train of thought there. The entire Asgardian civilization is, well, apparently, so, okay, when they look at the destruction of Asgard, it says the population was 9,719 and that they all died, which is not what happened in the MCU. And I'm unclear. They also acknowledge they're Avengers, which is cool. Then they also verbally say later, it's like, oh yeah, the destruction of Asgard and most of its people. I'm very sorry. And Loki's like, sure, yeah, whatever. But I'm just kind of unclear. Is the 9719 the number of people who died and fewer people escaped? Is 9719 the number of people who lived there and some of them escaped and then half of them died to Thanos? Is 9719 the number of people who died and subtract? I don't know what that number specifically means. It's just very interesting. And also, no civilization realistically works for a long stretch of time at under 10,000 people. So I don't know. You need to, genetically speaking, that starts to get a little bit iffy after a while. I think the idea is is it 300 or 30,000? I want to say it's 30,000, but I could see 300 possibly working, but you'd literally need to sit there and chart out everyone's genealogy to make it as undamaging as possible. But regardless, Mobius loves jet skis. He finds them fascinating, and he considers them a beautiful marriage of function and form. Loki also seems to like them too. Neither of them have ridden one. I really hope that's coming back. I feel like at the end of the season, there's going to be something with jet skis, whether it's one of them riding a jet ski into something or whatever. But I'm kind of hoping that we get a jet ski at the end. One of the, I think it's the big burly guy that the variant takes control of, says, I have shit to do, which we've now reached a point where Disney Plus has new TV shows where people are saying shit, which is just wild to me. I would never have dreamed of that growing up. That would have been the most unspeakable thing to happen in a Disney thing at all. The color grading in this episode is really strong, especially near the end. I understand that it's going to become even more insane later on. I'm looking forward to that. The closing theme changed hugely between this episode and the last, and I feel like they're going to go a direction similar to WandaVision, where each episode kind of has its own feel to the closing credits. It's kind of an interesting thing there. Some conclusions and thoughts on the episode overall. I feel like the entire series, especially this episode, is a treatise on canon and fanon in its own way. There's a lot of sort of meta-contextual discussion on weird alternate takes on Loki. What happens if things go out of control too much? The timekeepers keeping everything under control. The kind of fanaticism around it. There's a discussion with Mobius where he starts out by saying that he doesn't really care about believing this or not believing that because he just accepts what is real, but then later on says it's real because I believe it's real in regard to how the timekeepers work in the TVA. So there's a bit of, I wouldn't even call it hypocrisy. It's sort of just this blind spot for him. But there's kind of this discussion essentially that the show is having with yeah, but what if things happen differently? And I'm wondering if this is going to tie in at all to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, where that's going to be more multiversal than multi-timeline probably. So hopefully those will stay in their own lanes a little bit. And there's also the What If series, which I wonder if that's literally going to come into existence because Loki's going to essentially destroy or otherwise incapacitate the TVA or at least the timekeepers and allow these alternate timelines to exist in the first place. And maybe that's what allows the What If, because the premise of What If is that the Watcher or the Watchers are observing these alternate things happening. So that would inherently go against the idea of the TVA pruning timelines that don't belong. And I almost wonder if at the end of this, it's going to turn out that the TVA, that the timekeepers are trying to destroy or control the Watchers. Maybe? I don't know. And perhaps the idea would be that the Watchers or somebody else, maybe Loki or Mobius or Renslayer, wind up being in charge of the time variance authority in the end, and it's less draconian and a little bit more like, let's make sure the dangerous timelines are kind of kept at bay. And I'm wondering too if they're running with this thought that all of these variant Lokis are always trying to escape their fate. If the idea is that all of these Lokis know that they're bound to die in, a decade-ish from where his, life starts getting really interesting, and if the idea is that they're all trying to, like I said, to escape their fate, and that's why there's so many variant Lokis, because Loki is probably more capable of, instigating that than most, which again, you literally see a screen where a Nexus event is started by someone taking a wrong bus. Like, it's weird, because they talk about free will for a little bit, and that becomes kind of a whole thing, and they kind of shy away from a real discussion on it, in universe even, and I wonder if the idea is that everyone has free will, but the timekeepers then revert that free will and fold it back in the way that they want it to happen. I don't know. It's kind of confusing. I'm sure that free will is going to be a whole thing for this series, but there's also the last big thing that I want to talk about is there's a repeated line in this episode that came from the previous episode, and that is the variant says to female Loki, the variant says to male Loki, "This isn't about you," which is a repeated line from Judge Renslayer in the first episode, where I forget like what Loki says, like, "Don't you know who I am?" And the judge says, like, "This isn't about you, Loki. It never was." And it's like, this isn't by accident. This is going to be a whole thing. And the idea that he is an aberration to this timeline is going to keep coming up as that, like, this isn't about him. It's about everybody else, but it's going to be about him trying to reestablish himself or something, or figure out a new purpose in life. I have no idea where this series is going to end at this point. I assume that Loki and Mobius are going to live, because that's just kind of, I mean, or maybe they won't. Maybe the idea is that each season is going to feel dramatically different from the previous one. I don't know. Or if it's going to get more than two. It could be that the two seasons are part of each other. It could be that the two seasons are connected in the same way as like a movie and its sequel. I really don't know. What I do know is that I'm going to give this episode an 8. I think this was a great episode. It did a lot of exploration of the themes that it set up in the first episode. We got some really interesting events in place. We got to see the reset charges. We got one of the coolest time travel villain plots I've ever seen, which is hiding in the apocalypse so that someone who has the ability to determine that something's wrong can't find you. That's brilliant. I love that. Very excited for the third episode. I want to see what the bombed timeline does, and where things are going to go from here. Especially with the TVA reminds me so much of the police from Demolition Man, where they are so used to things just kind of working that a lot of them are just kind of sort of neutered a little bit, which is weird because the Minutemen, the hunters, are super jackboot ready to go and fight, but the rest of them, the clerks, are all like, they have no idea how to engage in anything serious. So I don't know. Very interested in seeing where that goes. As for next week, I'm actually going to be gone for next week. I'm going to be on vacation. Sarah and I, I'm sure, are going to watch the episode when it comes out, but I'm not going to be recording my reactions to it until at least next weekend, probably Sunday or Monday, and then it'll go up then. And then the fourth episode I'll be reacting to when that comes out. So we should be all caught up again by the fourth episode. I would love to hear what you guys think of the show, what you guys think of this review as well. It did dip a little bit into a beat by beat, but that was more just to set up the apocalypse hiding bit, which doesn't make a lot of sense if we don't kind of have a discussion on how we actually arrived at that point. But yeah. I think that's all I've got for today. I'm enjoying this a lot. It's good to see Tom Hiddleston. It is very weird, more in the previous episode, to see Tom Hiddleston in 2020, 2021 responding to a thing that he did in 2011, and we're meant to believe that is him just a few hours later, essentially. Like, it's the next day one day after he scrambles a guy's eye out of his head, he's caught by the TVA and looking at a video of him doing that. And not to say that Tom Hiddleston is looking old, but he certainly looks older. He looked very young in the Avengers, and now he looks, mature. I don't know, but anyway, those are my thoughts. I am looking forward to where the series is going. We've got 4 more episodes, and before it's even done, Black Widow is finally going to come out on July 9th. So I'm curious. I don't think those are going to interact at all. Maybe I'll do one of these reviews for Black Widow, or maybe we'll do a movie nights, the roundtable kind of deal. I don't know. But thank you guys very much for hanging out with me today, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.